Hello, hello.
Hi,
Hi, Elissa. How are you doing?
I'm fine, James.
Good.
How are you?
Not bad. Not
Yeah,
bad at all.
thank you for giving me your time.
Not at all. I
Yeah,
don't mind at all. I'm just glad we could finally get to do it. It's been months in the making.
it has. It's been this 4 month odyssey of trying
Uh,
to make it happen.
it must be an epic conversation
Oh, well, I
in the
hope
cards.
so. I don't want to, no pressure. It's so good to see you and talking to me. It's really quite unbelievable. I've been learning so much of you for a few years.
Well,
And
excellent. Glad to hear that.
yes, so hi, everybody. Welcome to I don't know what to call the show anymore, but it used to be Wakey Wakey. I'm not sure about that title anymore. I've become aware that everyone who watches is already awake, so that's just the nature of it. But tonight I'm really excited to be talking to James Corbett, one of the most intelligent, eloquent, true journalists of our time who puts his own life on the line, in a sense, to bring you news that you can't get from the conventional media, really, a lot of the time. And I love the way that you're a clear, sovereign, anarchist, voluntarist, and you're also so rational. And I feel like you're one of the people who I could sit my parents down in front of you and they would stop thinking I'm insane.
I'm looking forward to meeting this person you're introducing. I'm hoping he'll show up soon.
It's you, gorgeous.
Oh no, it couldn't possibly be. Well, that's the most flattering introduction, but now I feel I have to live up to that introduction, which is going to be a monumental task indeed. So I
No,
better
no,
be
no,
on my
no, no.
A game here.
I think of you as one of the great contributors to the revolution of consciousness of our times because when you're getting information on the internet, you have to learn to trust a source, right? And that takes years. It takes a lot of scrutiny and it takes faith at the start and then cross-referencing all sorts of things. And you're one of the people that, for me, I keep coming back to because I never can prove anything wrong that you've ever put out there. And that's a really good average. You're doing better than anyone else.
Well, I certainly try my best. I will.
Yeah,
I will accept what you're saying if only we can agree on the idea of trust. And I hope it's not blind trust or blind faith, because that's the first thing I always stress to everyone out there: is please do not take my word for it. Please do try to prove me wrong and do search the information. That's why I always put the sources for everything I talk about in the show notes for all of my podcast episodes and interviews, because I want people to see where I got my information from and how I put it together, because there's a lot of different ways to put the information together and different ways to interpret it. So I'm just putting my
absolutely.
interpretation out there.
And there's also nothing wrong with being wrong either. You know, I've been wrong a million times and will continue to be
Me
so.
too, believe it or not.
It's such an interesting time, of course, but I know that you're one of the people on the crest of the wave of this new consciousness that we're moving into within ourselves and then watching the world reflect that back at us. So I'd like to know, when did you first start to realize that you yourself were awakening to these broader truths that you'd been fed from school and other authorities?
Well, I often start my wake up narrative at 2006, around my, I guess that would have been my 20 something or other's birthday. What I moved into a new apartment, and at that time, the apartment came with a free internet connection, which I hadn't had in my apartment for several years. So I had been living kind of, going to internet cafes to check my email type of thing. So I was kind of detached from internet culture for a while.
Yeah,
And when I plugged back into the internet, suddenly there were things like YouTube and Google Video and these resources of all of these documentaries and all of the things that I could research to my heart's desire. And I had never really been in that paradigm before. I'd always been used to kind of the television or programming paradigm where you can choose between 30 different flavors of bagel, but you can certainly never choose a muffin. They tell you what you can watch and when you can watch it. So suddenly I was exposed to all this information. I could really just go and research things I was interested in at any time I wanted. It was a really transformational process for me, because of course I started to get into things that were political, but I always considered myself political in nature. And it wasn't long before I started encountering information that was completely completely different from what I'd heard before, and things that I couldn't, as you were saying, I couldn't prove it wrong when I actually went to prove it, and that started me down the rabbit hole in earnest. But I guess I could actually even locate it even earlier. There's a couple of incidents that happened even before I really started the research that became the Corbett Report. One of them was when I was going home from Japan here to Canada to attend my best friend's wedding. And at that time, also, I had a bit of facial hair, and I was a single man traveling from Asia. So, of course, I got pulled over for some extra inspection. And so they started, there was the customs woman was pulling stuff out of my suitcase and, looking at each thing very, very earnestly as if this is going to determine whether or not I'm a terrorist. And like looking at my book, I was reading a book by Chuck Palahniuk at that time, the author of Fight Club. I can't remember which book it was. And they were asking me, do you like this book? As if, and I was thinking, I wonder what answer I could give that would prove I'm not a terrorist.
And imagine if they pulled you up and did that to you now after the years of your profile on the internet. You'd be thinking, oh my God, you're right, I am a domestic.
Well, yeah, of course now I'd be thinking, well, obviously they must know about my background. But at the time, of course, I was a nobody, an anonymous person. And it was just so shocking to me that when they, for example, they pulled out my cell phone, which I brought from Japan, and it was a new phone, and I had a few pictures on it that I'd taken a night out with some friends. And they started looking through my pictures on my cell phone and asking me about who is this person and why are there so few pictures on this phone and things like this. And I thought that was so bizarre. And then I guess the final straw was when she pulled out my diary and my journal and started flipping through it. Can I take a photocopy of this? And I was just floored by this. I couldn't believe I was getting all this level of treatment. And that was kind of an arrow through the brain moment for me. It really did make me start to question what on earth was happening and what was this war on terror paradigm really about. I mean, I'd always had my suspicions about it, but that would really hit home for me. And another part of this waking up process, I was watching Gandhi, the biopic, starring Ben Kingsley. Yeah. And there was a scene in there where. When he was in South Africa, and there was the identity card that they brought in for the Indians in South Africa, and so as part of the protests, they were burning their identity card, which was against the law. The British were going to lock them up for it, and that really struck home with me as I was sitting here watching it in Japan, because in Japan, every single foreign resident has a little foreign resident card that you have to carry with you. And by law, a policeman on the street can stop you anywhere you are and ask to see your foreign resident card and question you. That's actually the law here. Yeah. And it never, I was sitting there watching this on this screen about this person who had been protesting and willing to be beaten up and thrown in jail for burning his identity card, 100 years ago. Yeah. And here I was sitting here in the comfort of my apartment in Japan with one of those cards in my pocket, and it had never occurred to me that was something that I should be concerned about. And that was another arrow through the brain moment that was part of this process. So I think the waking up process started a long time before it really started, if you know what I mean. Absolutely. I mean, the seeds were being planted, and then they started to flower once I got exposed to the water of the internet.
And was there some personal, emotional, or otherwise catalyst that made you step out into being a public speaker about this stuff, or was that a natural progression of the pure joy and thrill of discovering your own truths and wanting to share them?
I wouldn't say it was a joy or a thrill. It felt more like a necessity.
Or a responsibility.
I just knew from the time that I started encountering this information, I just knew I had to get it out to people. I mean, that was the number one overriding thing that I felt. And I at first I was thinking, well, how can I do this? I was literally thinking, well, I like that program, that podcast. I could download that. I could burn it onto a CD and hand it out to my friends here in Japan. I mean, that was the kind of thing I was thinking about at the time. And then it was actually, this is a funny one for some people in the audience, I'm sure, but no, I was listening to Alex Jones' radio show at the time, and one of the things that he said repeatedly in his broadcasts was, you can get out there, you can do this yourself, start a website. And one day I was sitting there listening to that message, and I thought, you know what? Why not? Why not? I've never in my life contemplated starting a website, never thought of podcasting or any sort of media. I never even crossed my mind that I would ever do that. And it just suddenly hit me one day. And literally within a process of a couple weeks, I'd already gotten my friend here to help me design the website. I already knew exactly what I wanted to do with it and what I was going to do a podcast, and I was going to have extensive documentation, and I even knew how I wanted it laid out. And it just came to me. And it's kind of strange because I'm not a particularly spontaneous person. I usually plan things out well in advance, and I'm very meticulous and kind of perfectionist. So I tend to leave things to procrastinate because I want everything perfect before I start it. The website was the exact opposite. It came to me in a rush. I started it as soon as I could, and before I knew it, I was podcasting, and I just never looked back. So it was kind of an amazing process looking back at it, and I can't even really describe why I did it or how I did it. It just sort of happened to me.
And your website is really beautiful. It's really calming, and it seems really it's just conventional, and it seems like a CNNBC or whatever sort of vibe, but at the same time the information is always mind-boggling and very original as well. You talk to some really interesting people and often get the first I get a lot of new information from you. So I'm really thankful that you did set it up, and that this is a place where, because we all get our information for different reasons as well. And for me, I'd like to say you're extremely serious and responsible, and your journalism is top notch, but you're hilarious as well, and that is a beautiful thing. And now you literally have tens of millions of people who view and have viewed your stuff. And I mean, for anyone out there who doesn't know, we should attach 9/11 in a nutshell to this, because that's probably your most popular video, and it shows everybody in 5 minutes how 9/11, the official story, is the conspiracy theory from hell. So, but beyond that, which I consider such old news now, everything that you put out is always mind-blowing for me. So I know what you mean about the airport feeling as well. I got pulled up when I went into England last year, and they kept me for 5 hours in English customs, and they asked for my phone and my computer and my diary, and they took it all away from me, which was horrible because my diary is just, that's like asking to look inside my underpants, basically. And if they would have done that, I would have drawn the line. As much as, oh, I'm not going to say that. That just makes me sound unprofessional. But and I had this little Nazi chick who was like, "We need to check your bags. Is that your bag on the carousel? We need to check your bags." And I was like, "Okay, fine." And I was running along behind her, and I started to realize what was happening to me. And I said to her, "Look, I don't know what's going on here, but you seem angry at me. So if you already have found something in my bag, I want you to know that it's not mine. I would never carry anything across a border. And I've just been sleeping in Madrid airport last night, and every time you go to the toilet, you don't take 50 kilos of luggage. So we're checking the airport CCTV if you find anything in my thing." And they were like, "Oh, you're a bit paranoid, aren't you?" And I was like, "Well, yes, I am paranoid, because I do a blog that has about 50 to 100 readers a day, no one, but it's all about the world's pedophile gangs and the police corruption and the judges corruption and all of these things. So yes, I would consider myself a little bit paranoid when I'm crossing through your border, and I know that the authorities in this country may well have a little purple mark next to my name." So do you travel a lot?
I wouldn't say a lot. Certainly not now that I have the son. I'm a stay-at-home dad, so I hardly even get out of the house, let alone out of the country.
That's unreal. Congratulations on him as
Thank you.
well. Yeah, that's a beautiful thing for you and your wife. So did you have any people that you started to talk to and, go crazy trying to sort of bounce this stuff off when you first started to come into really juicy information?
To be honest, I think I've had a very different experience than a lot of people have, because I know a lot of people, I've gotten a lot of feedback over the years from people who've been very frustrated because they've encountered this information and their best friend or their family or someone they care about just doesn't see it, and it causes the a rift between them. And I can certainly understand that, because it really, once you start to really get into this information, it really does completely change your worldview, and that can't that can't happen without it being reflected in your relationships. So it really could. I mean, I totally understand how it could rip relationships apart, and that could be a terrible thing. I've been quite blessed with that from that perspective. When I first started encountering this and sharing it with people, I've had friends here in real life in Japan that I've talked to that are completely sympathetic, and some people that were there before me, so no problem with that. And then with my family, my parents were completely receptive to this information when I first started talking to them about it. And in fact, now that I think back to my childhood, I think back to stories that my father would tell me sometimes that I thought were just, what's he talking about? He's just crazy. Talking about the Knights Templar and discovering gold and
It's in
whatever
your
and all of this. And I thought,
DNA.
what is he talking about? What is this? And now looking back, I think he already kind of knew some of this stuff,
Oh
even a long time
yeah,
ago.
and that's probably why they were receptive because they had laid the groundwork. Because the groundwork is recognizing that this is thousands of years old. This plan, if not, obviously hundreds and probably thousands. And yeah, we're seeing a sort of an end game. We really are in these times, and so I think your dad's probably so proud of you, what you've taken and done with it.
I hope so. I
Taken
think
that
he is.
ball and ran with it. Yeah. Well, that's great. And so, did you ever lose any friends? Does any? Maybe it's because of the way you talk, and maybe I'm just such a crazy arguer. Maybe I find that I fight with a lot of people. Not fight, but I do. I scream sometimes. I really can't stay calm as much as I would love to and should.
Yeah, no, I can understand what you're saying. I don't think I've lost a friendship or anything over this. I think people just kind of accept it. I don't know if that's a testament to my ability to communicate it or just their willingness to put up with me, but, but either way, I guess I have great friends. But no, I do. I mean, there's obviously you spend more time and you gravitate towards the things that interest you. So obviously, I think the levels of communication that I have with different friends has probably changed because I can be more talkative with this person because we can talk about these issues or that type of thing. But it's never caused a huge rift for me because I don't. I don't tend to proselytize this to people. I mean, I certainly share my viewpoint, and if people are asking my opinion, I'm happy to give it. But I don't push it to the point where if you don't believe what I believe on this issue, I'm not going to talk to you. That kind of thing. I don't see the point in that to a large extent. And again, I think that this is the type of thing that, like in my case, I think I had some of the groundwork prepared because I had experienced certain things. So when I started getting the information, it kind of made sense to me in a way. I tend to think of other people out there it in that way. I mean, maybe they haven't had the preparatory experiences. Maybe the seeds are being planted now. I'm happy for the seeds to be planted now and it to flower later. That's really up to them, and that's not something that I feel that I can force or I can affect in any way. So I'll certainly, again, I'll talk to people and we'll discuss things. We'll argue if that it comes to that, but I don't let it consume me or consume the relationship because I think that's counterproductive in the end. I don't think you can actually make someone have that conversion experience. I don't think you can make someone wake up. All you can do is show them some information and tell them how you got to where you are, and they'll do with it what they will.
That is beautiful. I don't stop any relationships, and I'm very blessed that even people I've lost my shit with have remained true to me as unconditional friends. So I'm happy for that. But I just wish that I wasn't so extreme in my. It is probably proselytizing, and so that word has just made me realize I've got to pull my head in a little bit, especially with people who I love and want to always keep around me. But
Well, I don't think the proselytizing urge is a bad thing. I mean, because this is information that you and myself and the people who are watching this know is transformational. It is life changing, and it really is an important thing for the future of humanity. So
yes,
we can't overstress how important it is, and that's
yeah.
exactly where that proselytizing urge comes from. And I understand that completely. It's just perhaps maybe I'm more cynical about it, that I don't think that people will necessarily just see the information, the data, and immediately transform their worldview. I think there's a lot of psychological gears that have to be turned in their own head. And again, there's nothing I can do to make that happen. All I can do is show the data and tell people what it's done for my life. But I guess it's one of those things where I'd rather be the change and show the change rather than tell people about the change.
Yes, I'm a big fan of Mark Passio, and I've learnt a lot from his website, What on Earth is Happening. And I like, there's a few of his podcasts where he says, I'm not going to give it to you in baby steps. I'm not going to spoon feed you in little mouthfuls. I'm going to shove it down your throat. Because I like that sort of sense of urgency that he has as well. Because when I look at some things like Miley Cyrus doing Carly at the whatever Video Music Awards or something, I realize we're being noticed. These are end times. Something is going to happen and change everything in a sudden way.
Well, that's a good point, because I should say from my own experience, I mean, one of the early influences, I won't say the person who woke me up, but one of the early influences on me was Alex Jones, who's obviously a very controversial figure because he is so out there and such a big, forceful personality. And a lot of people hate that, absolutely detest that style of presentation. For me, it was effective. Yeah. It really did cut through my conditioning in a way that helped me to see some of this information for the first time and to challenge it. Well, that can't be right. He's got to be crazy. Oh, wait, no, that's actually true. So it worked for me. So I'm also not a big believer in one-size-fits-all solutions. I mean, I couldn't be that type of person if I tried. It would come across as fake, because that's not the type of person I am. I have my own style of delivery. There are people out there who hate that style of delivery. There are other people who love it.
I'm not.
Trust me, I hear some of the haters.
It's good.
Again, I
don't
really mind. There will be people who hate. There will be people who love, and I think all I can do is just reflect honestly who I am, and the people who will gravitate to that, and that's all to the good.
Well, I think you're doing a wonderful job, and I certainly have learnt to trust you, and I want to thank you for being what I consider a trustworthy fellow human being, and being a great journalist. So, in what ways do you comply with or defy government? I was just watching a video on you earlier. Let me try. It's one of my favourites that you ever did, the Stockholm Syndrome ones. And it's you read from a quote from a guy, Michael, someone I can't remember. And I want to know personally, if you don't mind talking about it, in what ways, how you deal with that stuff.
Well, that's an exceptionally important question for everyone who's seriously involved in this. I mean, I think it's the question of this being entertainment, or is it your lifestyle? I mean, is this something you really take to heart, or is it something that you're just talking about? And so I've dealt with this question in different ways over the years, and I think that's one of the main ways that I think you can see the transformation of myself and my philosophy since the beginning of the Corbett Report. I think when I started this, I was still very much steeped in the idea of electoral politics, and at the time, we got to get Bush out of office and things like this, and that was a driving concern. And over the years, obviously, I think I've evolved away from that and through people like Ron Paul towards an idea of individual liberty being more important than the electoral political process, which has only ever gotten us into the situation we're in. It's never transformed society for the better in the long run. So I've given up on that idea that there's political maneuvering that can be done. And I've really come to the idea that for my own sake, for the sake of myself and my family, I am not interested in fighting the government. I'm not interested in taking up arms or taking up a pitchfork and storming Tokyo and demanding my rights in that way. I think that when you approach it in that way, you create the battle. You create the I don't know how to say it. The conflict itself.
It's an energy friction by putting up something to fight
exactly
against.
Right. Yes, it's a friction, and it creates the heat. It creates the sparks. It creates the fire. And I think it only ever works to the detriment of humanity. I mean, we can look at revolution after revolution, people picking up arms and pitchforks, and it always ends in in bloodbaths, or at the very best, I mean, you could look at something like an American Revolution, and what did that ultimately result in? I mean, it resulted in a government that was going to be the most contained, the smallest, the most free country that the world has ever seen. And what is it now? It is absolutely a nightmare vision of totalitarianism. So how did we get there? Well, obviously, if we keep doing the same things, we're going to keep getting the same results. So I've really come around to the idea that the most important thing that we can do is try to detach ourselves from the governmental system more so than to fight against it. And I always get a few people in the audience who will always email me to say something like, well, they're going to come after us at some point, once we build up the, alternative systems enough. And yes, of course, I think that the oligarchy that exists and presumably always has, as Aldous Huxley said in his famous last speech, I think they obviously will come at this movement in different ways as it continues to progress. And we've already seen the beginnings of this, them trying to make collecting rainwater illegal and things like this, just craziness of that sort. But I really do believe that at a certain point, when there are enough people doing this, that's not going to work. Brute force cannot work as a way to repress humanity over long periods of time. It just always fails, and it always has throughout history. The thing I'm more concerned about is the idea that we can be conditioned into actually desiring our own enslavement. And I think that's the really insidious part of all of this, is that if we keep looking for leaders and we keep looking for political solutions and we keep turning to government, we are going to be led into this, the New World Order, the Matrix, whatever it is. In fact, it's going to be more and more technological from here on in, as we're starting to tinker with the human genome and all of this craziness that is truly transforming what it means to be human. So it's an exceptionally important time, which is why I think the most important thing that I do on a day-to-day basis is what I do with my son.
Yeah.
It is truly creating the next generation and shaping and hopefully demonstrating to them what this life is about and what it should be about is the most important thing that any of us can be doing, because I'm under no delusion that this web of control that's been put in place over the course of centuries, if not millennia, as you said, is going to fall overnight. I would love to be able to say that it'll fall in my lifetime. I have no confidence that it will, but I really do think that if this is an intergenerational project, then it really does have to start somewhere, and it has to start with each and every single one of us working on the next generation of human beings. And so that's something I very much have in the forefront of my mind when I look at my son, and hopefully teaching him about how we don't have to rely on this system, how we as human beings can come together as individuals, voluntarily interacting with each other to create something better than what we have. And if I didn't believe that, I wouldn't be here talking to you, and I'd probably be off in a corner somewhere sucking my thumb. So that's why I'm here doing this, and I think that's the most productive thing that I can be doing. And I don't want to speak for anyone else. Everyone has their own methods, but I really do advocate it for people out there to be thinking about how they can be detaching themselves from the system and being an example for the next generation.
Yeah, I don't believe in hurting myself by my defiance of the government, but I think I learned a long time ago when I was about 20 something. I got trampled by a horse at a uranium protest, and despite all of the people not wanting the uranium out of the ground. Despite all the people who protest, they still do it, and I just got so disheartened and recognized that I was going to only damage myself by going and fighting in that front line or whatever. And so I've always been looking for other ways to get to the root of the problem. And then I guess in the last sort of eight years or something, because of major events like 9/11 has made me research what's behind the dollar and what's behind the politics, what's behind media, what's behind entertainment, and finding that it's all the same answer across all of these fields has been the most enlightening part, because it does make you recognize that it is organized. That's what I often fight with my brother, and he always just completely poo-poos the idea that it could be organized. He just cannot see. I mean, obviously he hasn't done the same research and he's lived in a different way, so he hasn't come to that information in the way that I've come to it. But that is the hardest thing for me to sort of try and explain. And one of my friends just wrote to me yesterday saying that there's only one copy of Carol Quigley's Tragedy and Hope in the Auckland Library in New Zealand, and that they've been reducing the actual copies and that they're making digitalized copies that God knows what they can do to, and so I'm realizing that just like they burned the libraries thousands of years ago, they're doing the same now, constantly cleaning things up all the time, so that we have less and less information about who runs us, who owns us, who's harvesting our energy for their benefit, and who has set up the whole slave system that we're a part of.
It's so true. And again, for people who, it's generally people who refuse to look at the information who maintain that it couldn't possibly be organized, because it's an open conspiracy, and that was the name of one of H.G. Wells's books, actually. So, and it has been for centuries, and we can look back at someone like an H.G. Wells, who's of course thought of as a science fiction writer, but was actually the person who drafted the first draft of the UN Declaration of Human Rights, which gives you all these wonderful fuzzy, lovey-dovey types of human rights, and then at the end says, but if you're against the UN, we can take any of these away that we want.
Oh, I had no idea.
It's an interesting little document. People should go back and review it, and then take a look towards the end of the document and see what it says about the United Nations having the ability to take people's rights away.
So he was the first draft writer, and obviously then they threw it around with a few other writers, or what?
Yeah, it's been a few years since I've looked at the origin of it, but he was definitely involved in the drafting of it at the early stages, and it ended up becoming what it is now. This document that we're supposed to revere, but don't read too carefully.
It was part of my... Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, or we could look at Carol Quigley, obviously, great example, Georgetown professor, name-checked by Bill Clinton, very prestigious, wrote Tragedy and Hope, Anglo-American Establishment, all of these great works with access to the archives of the Council on Foreign Relations, these groups that are often talked about by these crazy conspiracy theorists. He had access to their archives and said, hey, guess what? Yeah, it's a big conspiracy, and I agree with it. I think it's a great thing. The only thing I disagree with is they want to keep it quiet for some reason.
Yeah.
And then towards the end of his career, he found out after the fact that they had destroyed the first printing template for the book, despite the fact that was in the contract that they shouldn't do that. It was destroyed, and so he was surprised at that. I wonder what's going on. Apparently, he didn't really understand the subject that he was writing about too well. You could look at someone like Charles Galton Darwin writing a book called The Next Million Years, and I really suggest people take a look at that. It's an interesting little book. He basically says evolution will change humanity in a million years, but hey, you know what? We've got technology now; we can do it in the course of centuries. And he started saying, well, what would we want to change humanity to be like? Well, we'd want to make the men a little bit less manly because we want them to not be a threat to the power structure, and we want fertility to decrease. We want he has this list of things, and lo and behold, they're playing around with these chemicals back in the 1930s and bisphenol A, and they think, oh, this is an estrogen mimicking compound. We should use it as an estrogen therapy. They try it out as that for a little while. And then a couple decades later, they start using it as one of the ingredients to make up a certain type of plastic that ends up getting put in everything, from baby bottles to the resin that they use to print on the ink that they use to print on sheet receipts,
yes.
and the lining of food cans. I wonder how that estrogen mimicker just managed to get in there.
And then they
now, of course, we see
the state water and tell you have to drink 2 liters of water a day. So then you have to buy it in bisphenol A bottles. And
of course, I mean, you know it, obviously,
you're growing boobs and beards.
And then we have fish that are becoming hermaphroditic and things from all of the chemicals in the waters. It sounds crazy. It sounds insane until you actually pull up the actual stories about what's all of these various pieces of the puzzle. And I guess you can look at all of these pieces of this puzzle. I mean, the thousands of more data points than I could possibly say in one conversation. And you could say, yep, all a coincidence. To me, the coincidence theorists are the crazy ones, but
Yeah.
maybe that's just my perspective.
Yes, no, I used to have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights up in my bathroom. I don't know why, just I thought it was a lovely document, you know. And as I
I thought it
used
was
to,
to wipe your. Never mind.
yeah, it should have been, but over the years, I used to sit there on the toilet and look at it, and over the years I just realised none of this is being upheld. The UN are the greatest defilers of this document on the planet, probably, in really subtle and hidden ways, or ways that aren't hidden but aren't reported on by their loyal dog media. So, yeah, it's been really interesting for me to now. I really can look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as toilet paper, since you give me that little end bit.
Article 29.3. These rights and freedoms may in no case be exercised contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations.
Oh, that makes so much sense now. I have to pass that on to my friends who work at the United Nations. Oh my God. It's
Just a little Easter egg that they put at the very end that they hope no one will read. Yes.
You're sort of tired by that stage, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, sounds good. Sounds wonderful. I like these rights. Oh, freedom. Yeah.
Oh. So who were your great teachers? Do you want to, who made you start thinking outside consensus reality, and who have continued over the years to be, your best sources, if you want to share them?
Well, again, I think my parents were obviously hugely influential in shaping who I became, as I'm sure a lot of, well, pretty much everyone's parents are very
My dad
formative
never
in that way.
lectured me on the Knights Templar.
Yeah, well, yeah. Again, some of the things that my father talked about when I was young, I didn't understand until I was much older. But yeah, it was all part of the background. And my mother, just one of the most caring, wonderful human beings that I've ever had the pleasure of knowing. And it was a blessing to have her as my mother. She passed away a few years ago,
Oh, I'm sorry.
just before the 3/11 earthquake and tsunami here. So very, very, very terrible time for me a few years ago now.
Yeah.
And then I was also very lucky in terms of my education. I know everyone has horror stories from childhood and schooling and the trauma of public education indoctrination, and I have my own, I suppose. But in terms of my teachers, I always had very supportive teachers, and always at least one or two teachers that I could really look up to that really did really did help me to think outside the box. I also had a lot of teachers that, as a child even, I was quite precocious at times, and intellectually precocious. I always wanted to argue against the teacher. And I know some teachers are definitely not into that and don't want to hear that. I always had teachers that were quite supportive
The
of that
dumb
and
ones
encouraged
are.
me, so
Yeah.
that was great.
I had some good teachers the same who really loved it when I challenged them, but then I did have a couple who were just really, really put out by stating the obvious. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I know. It happens sometimes. And from progressing from there, I mean, I think I can't even think before I started encountering this information in terms of politically. I read Chomsky and things like this, but I certainly don't look up to Chomsky at this point.
Me neither.
There's really nothing from that period that I can think of from sort of the cultural or media zeitgeist that was really a positive influence on me in that way. At the time, I was more interested in literature and reading books than I was in politics anyway, so perhaps that doesn't count. And then when I started to get into this, it was a lot of podcasters and people like Alex Jones was influential on me at first. Alan Watts was influential
Alan
in the
Watts.
beginning for me. A bunch of people. The Money Masters was an extremely important documentary for me. That really helped me along in my process of waking up. So I owe a lot to a lot of different people, and hopefully I've put some back into the collective pot out there, so people can draw from it and hopefully start their own process.
And then some. You've done wonders. You've just put out an absolute library of your own, and it's like I say, it's always good. And so, what videos were you watching on YouTube when you first got that Wi-Fi connection in your flat?
Ones that I can remember. I definitely remember watching. Well, I started out watching things like The Daily Show or whatever, which were kind of, where I was coming from politically at the time, and just seemed in tune with what I was thinking about and the way that I thought. But I always saw these related videos, these 9/11 truth videos, and so I'd click on one occasionally, and some of them were just silly, just pods floating in the sky kind of thing. But some of
Yeah.
them were quite interesting and infuriating, and I wanted to prove them wrong. And then those ones kind of drew me in, and I couldn't actually disprove what they were saying, and that drew me in even further. So some of the ones that I remember, I mean, certainly I saw Loose Change at a certain point. I saw there was one called 9/11 Mysteries, which was an interesting one back in the day, which was supposed to be, from what I understand, the first part of a series of documentaries, but I think they only ever made the first one, or I only ever saw the first one. The Money Masters was another one. The Century of the Self by Adam Curtis
I haven't
was.
seen that.
You really should. And I've done a podcast warning about Adam Curtis because I think he implants some very, very mainstream ideas in these documentaries that really go against the alternative narrative. But having said that, they are very important documentaries because there's always little bits and pieces and information in there that are interesting. And The Century of the Self, especially the first episode of that, I think it's a 3-part series. The first one is exceptionally interesting and talks about Edward Bernays, the American nephew of Sigmund Freud, and how he adapted all of Freud's insights into the psyche into marketing and making people do things that they wouldn't otherwise do. Just
I think of
fascinating,
him
and
every
that really
time I
opened
have
up a
a
whole.
freedom torch.
Yeah, exactly. Freedom Torch, bacon and eggs, fluoride. We can thank Mr. Bernays for a lot of things in our
Feminism,
society.
getting out of the house and working for the women.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
all part and parcel of that wonderful freedom. So yes, they were all very influential on me early on, and from there it was just like a skipping stone across water, just going from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, and before you know it, you blink an eye, and you're 7 years older, and you got a face full of beard and a 11-month-old son crawling around the house.
Well, it's a beautiful thing the way life works. And did you find that the information came to you in a synchronistic fashion, not just you searching, but also the influences that came into you? Did they appear strangely to correlate with each other at times?
Absolutely, yeah. No, that is one of the strange things that happens when you're producing content on a regular basis. Doing a weekly podcast, I always have to be thinking about, oh, what will I do next week? And sometimes I'll just set a topic, and then during the course between setting the topic and then actually doing the podcast, during that course of that week, there's so many times when I've found certain news stories have happened or certain things have happened, but in that week that are specifically about the thing I'd already planned to do. It's happened so many times. It's almost mind-boggling.
Goosebumps.
Maybe it's just pattern recognition, but
It's spirit.
there are
It's
times in which
spirit.
it's really interesting.
If my body gets goosebumps, it's not pattern recognition, it's spirit. A spirit moves my body to tell me when truth is being spoken or beautiful music is being sung or whatever. So I can tell you with my body's proof, it's spirit or something. So
Well, I one that I can think of off the top of my head, I did an entire podcast about monetary reform and how the money issue is going to be so important. The economy, we're facing collapse, and I put it out. I think the day before the Lehman Brothers collapse, and
oh my
it was
God.
just incredible timing on that. And again, it's just things like that happen so often that you just got to shake your head. You don't know
And do you
where it
feel
comes
you're
from.
fulfilling some higher purpose as well as your own satisfaction?
Yes, I don't know what kind of higher purpose there is. I don't claim to have any special access to that, but I'm certainly not adverse to the idea that there is something more to this universe, and I'm certainly not a materialist. I think that there is something else out there, and I don't know what kind of conduit people are for that. I don't know how that
Conduit.
process works, but I'm just
I,
trying to be
yeah.
receptive to what's coming to me and projecting it in the best way that I can.
For me, the word conduit says everything because it wasn't until I was probably in my late teens that I recognized that the possibility that the human body is a receiver, the brain is a receiver, and that our thoughts maybe are not just generated from these meat sacks of brain in our skulls, that possibly that we can communicate or the the great organizing force of the universe may well work through us, even though we think we're self-generating everything that happens inside us.
Right. Well, I think I've always been receptive to that idea, especially because, of course, I do come at this from the logical, rational background that I have with my education in literature, and one of the concepts that we study at the in the post-secondary level when we're studying literature is the idea that thoughts. It's ultimate hubris to think that our thoughts are our own. That we have come up with this thought, that this is something new and original with us, and we did it. Of course not. There is a cultural context in which everything is thought, and it's the ultimate hubris to think that I am responsible for what I've done in a concrete sense. I mean, of course, I do agree that people do have the right to what they produce, but I don't see it as being something that's just that comes from within myself. It's something that I am steeped in a situation that is feeding into me in all sorts of different ways, consciously and subconsciously, all the time. And it comes out and gets regurgitated in a different way, in a different format. And they often say there's nothing new under the sun. And I think to a certain extent, ideologically, I agree with that. I think that we're just finding different ways to put the old eternal truths in new contexts for the situation we find ourselves in. And I think we have to keep anchored in that, because there is, it can be very tempting for us to think of ourselves as creating our generation anew every generation. But again, I think it's ultimate hubris, and I think we have to understand that a lot of the issues that we're facing are the same issues that humanity has been facing since the dawn of civilization, and we're just facing it at a different technological stage. But it doesn't mean that the issue itself is any different, or that our reaction to it should be any different. I mean, I've had forefathers and foremothers who have fought and died and sweated and broken their backs trying to make this world a better place, and it would be pretty sad if I was the weak link in the chain that let everyone down by just giving in to the tyranny.
Yes, yes. For me, I like to think that this is why I don't like to work with scripts, and I like to be spontaneous in a fresh moment, because I recognize that letting the universe, or whatever name you give it, flow through you off the cuff is the greatest respect that you can give to that universe, rather than sort of thinking your mind itself. Even though you can tidy things up, you can perfect them. I really love to give that credit to the spontaneity of the moment and whatever it is that I'm a part of, and I like to tap into that. I like to think that's really honouring nature or God. So you were talking about Charles Galton Darwin. That's Charles Darwin's grandfather, right?
Grandson, I believe.
I thought he was the grandfather of Charles Darwin, the evolutionist.
No, Erasmus Darwin was Charles's father, right?
I don't know. All I know is that the families were having sex with the Potters, or the Wedgwoods or somebody.
Yes, exactly. The Darwins and the Wedgwoods are sometimes called the Darwoods because they were so interbred. But also the Galtons, the Huxleys, they're all kind of floating around in there, and it's interesting to see. It's interesting to see the number of people who are connected to the family one way or another through one relation or another, who end up being on the head of the eugenics society or what have you, and people that you wouldn't necessarily even think of, like John Maynard Keynes, who's always thought of as an economist, was also a rabid eugenicist and the head of the eugenics society at one point. So
wow.
It's interesting, and of course he was also a relation to Darwin. It always goes back to the same little family milieu that was there in the late 19th century that came up with the theory. And lo and behold, they became the families that interbred and became the heads of the eugenics societies that have guided this philosophy along through the last century.
And I see it everywhere when I'm walking in the street and there's chemtrails, and when I walked past a sign today on a wall that said, "Caution, rainwater, do not drink," above a tap on the side of a building.
Yeah.
It was so funny. I just thought, what dystopian nightmare am I in? And it's more and more all the time.
Well, in certain places, you could get arrested for drinking that rainwater.
Oh, really? Especially
collecting. There's somewhere in the United States, they tried to make it illegal to collect rainwater.
Yes, I hear these things, and without being there, it's hard to verify. But oh God, it's just getting crazier and crazier. I thought Charles Galton was Charles Darwin, our evolutionist friend's grandfather, but you may be right. He maybe is the grandson. We'll both have to
No,
check that
he's
out.
a combination Galton Darwin. Francis Galton was the founder of, or the person who coined the term eugenics. He was Darwin's cousin, and at some point, I guess his daughter married Darwin's son or something like that. At any rate, it's one of those intermarriage things.
I went to a Nassim Haramein sort of lecture a few years ago, and at one stage in the lecture there was a question time, and I mentioned something about the eugenics agenda, and Nassim Haramein was like, "There's no eugenics agenda. That's ridiculous. That's conspiracy." And I was like, I could not listen to another thing that the guy said ever since that day. And I loved him up until that point. I'd learnt a lot from him. But hearing him say that in a room full of people I couldn't reconcile that there would be any reason for him saying that other than to steer us in the wrong direction, and that he could only be working for those people if he's trying to tell a room full of people that that's not real, because it is I mean, freedom of information requests have proven that it's been a very big agenda being played out for at least 60 years publicly and openly. So, yeah, it's
Well,
funny
again,
how.
it's another one of those open conspiracies. All you have to do is to track the eugenics society in America and in Britain, and then as it morphed into the Population Council and literally shared an office with the Population Council for a little while, set up, of
Sexual
course,
health,
by Rockefeller. I
yes,
mean, it all leads
Planned
back to the same
Parenthood.
people in the same offices, working in the same things. They just changed the name, and literally the Eugenics Quarterly became something like biodemography journal or something like that. I mean, they just changed the name, and
Yeah,
you're expected to believe that, yep, eugenics is gone.
yeah, we don't do that anymore. No, we don't
Yeah,
do
and then you
MK
get people
Ultra.
like the co-founder of DNA, double helix structure of DNA. I can't remember. I think it was Watson or
I
one
have
of
no
those.
idea.
Or Crick? No, Watson. Anyway, famous scientist came out a few years ago, and there was a big controversy because he said that, well, I mean, Africans can't attain our level of education or something along those lines, and everyone was quite shocked that this scientific hero would say something like this. And basically, if you trace it back, I mean, he worked at the Cold Springs Harbor Laboratory, which was the birthplace of the American eugenics movement. So it all goes back to the same places. It's all out there in the open. You can research the backgrounds of these people and where they're coming from and what they're working on and what organizations they belong to. It is, I mean, it's not a theory.
Yeah.
It's there. You can actually go and research these things. But so people who deny it are either stupid or they're lying.
They're lying to themselves to preserve their mind in a state which means that they can continue taking money for doing what they're doing. But that's just my opinion. So when I think about Darwin, I remember Alan Watts taught me about Darwin, just saying that he started this whole concept of us thinking that it's a dog eat dog world, and that we are all it's survival of the fittest. So therefore, if there are people more stronger than you or more richer or more powerful, it's only because you're just a little bit less than them on the evolutionary scale, and don't step out of your place, because you've got your place and we have ours, and so that infuriated me so much. I was already pissed off at Darwin because that was the religion I was raised in, and thank God I didn't have Catholicism, but Darwinism is just as offensive to me now, because I can recognize the way it's been used to steer the population into this sort of self-flagellatory state that we're in, whereby we accept being ruled over with violence, and that we accept our livelihood decisions being made by people who are ultimately always taking more and more of our freedoms away. So that's been a nice.
Right, and the standard line for the for people is to say, well, Darwin didn't believe that. Darwin wasn't arguing that. It was his cousin Galton who came up with that, the social Darwinism and all that. That was all him. But if you actually go and read Darwin, no, it was in there. What's the famous work? Not Descent of Man, the other one. Origin of Species,
Yes.
and the subtitle. What is the subtitle? Something like for the preservation of races
It's
or
just in
whatever.
the next room. I can go and get it because I think Dad's left it out sort of subtly. I'm on
I'm sure I could
holidays.
look it up in about 3 seconds here on the internet, but at
Yeah,
any
but
rate, it's even embedded in the title, and he goes on to talk about the Irish as being, an inferior race of human beings and things like this. So it's embedded in his own work as well, to a lesser extent. But it's interesting then to see him being sort of the experiment. I mean, that's what the Darwin Wedgwood and all of that interbreeding was all about. It's if you truly believe in the social Darwinistic principles and in the eugenics principles, then you do it in your own life and you start interbreeding only with the finest. And of course, only the finest are us, Darwins and Wedgwoods and Huxleys. So
yeah,
they started doing this, thinking they're going to produce the Superman. And of course, Darwin had married his first cousin, who I think was also the product of a first cousin marriage going back and back and back. And of course, they ended up having numerous children dying in childhood, sickly, frail creatures as a result of all this inbreeding. Surprise, surprise. So, I mean, again, they disproved it themselves in their own life, and yet continued to propound it for generations hence.
yeah, and continue to sort of propel themselves into greater and greater wealth and power because of our ignorance, really. So I'd like to ask you, we've got to wrap up in a minute because I'm trying to keep them around an hour, but I'd like to ask you how you feel about the concept of life after death because for me, that's really when I started to recognize myself as a spiritual being and not just a physical being, then I could let go of a lot of my fears about my physical existence and that's when I started to, when I found really great big injustices and I knew that I was possibly making myself a target by talking about them. That's when when I had a full understanding and subjective proving to myself that I'm not my body, then that was how I started to work like this. So I want to ask you naturally how you feel about that concept.
Well, I would say this: I certainly don't fear death. It's not something that I think. Again, I don't have the spiritual answers, and I don't ask people to turn to me for them. But it's not something that I fear. I don't, and again, I'm not a materialist. I'm not a naturalist. I think that there is something more to this universe than what we can quantify or reduce or measure or put in a weight scale. And I just the bioreductionist explanations for consciousness are not convincing to me. I think there is something more to consciousness than just atoms and quantum states and all of this. There's something unquantifiable there. And again, I don't claim to know what that is or how that functions. But again, I'm not afraid of death. I don't. I'm certainly happy with my life. I'm not wishing for death in any way, shape, or form. But if it comes and when it comes, it'll come. And I uh, I I don't think that I don't think that consciousness will die. I don't know what that means, but I don't think that it's going to be an endpoint for the universe, when we all die out.
That's a really nice answer, and I think for me it's nice to hear. It's nice to look at somebody so rational as you, who is also naturally attuned to, as knowledge, but not knowing how or why you know it, but just knowing that you think you know it, and that's a beautiful thing. For me, it's a peaceful feeling. I feel that we can't ever die at the wrong time. I somehow believe that this stuff is possibly fated isn't even the right word, but that that nothing can be wrong in this great organizational chaos that we're in, And for me, I just call it love. I just call everything love because that's a great word that encompasses the possibility for how everything could happen, all the darkness and the child fucking and the oppression of all of us and the pain and the torture and the shooting all the people in the head with the CIA hidden, it all is okay ultimately to me because I recognize that we possibly are the thing that recycles and recycles and recycles, and also that might be one of the reasons why the great tragedies that occur on this planet ultimately are okay because they're not, it's just a dream and it's just a changing of the facets of that dream. Does that make any sense?
I think so. I think I understand what you're saying, but let me put it this way from my own perspective. If I could reduce everything that I've ever done, my entire body of work, everything that I've ever done for the Corbett Report to one word, and that word was love, then I think it would be that would be my mission accomplished. I mean, if that's what it reduces to at the end of the day, then that's the message that I'm trying to put across in some way or other. So I
I
certainly.
get that, and I think it is the reason and the season for why you do what you do, and I think it comes out in your work. So I'm glad that you're, hip with my explanation of that. And do you survive financially off your work doing this?
I actually do. And again, that's another thing that I sometimes have to pinch myself that I am able to keep a roof over my head and food on our family's table through the kindness of strangers, literally. And that's something that I know a lot of people on this planet are not able to do. So I'm in an exceptionally lucky position, exceptionally wonderful position to be in to do this work that I'm doing, which is why I take the work very seriously. I don't take myself too seriously, I hope, but I do take this work seriously because I do think it's an important message. So I really do. I truly am grateful for the people out there that subscribe or buy my DVDs. It truly does make this website possible and the work that I'm doing possible. And again, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, if you had asked me what I would be doing with my life, I could not have even conceived that I would be doing this for a living. So it's just, you never know where life's going to take you.
Yes, into being an internet sensation and a fantastic and a true journalist. Because if you were if you'd gone to journalism school, I don't think you'd be doing as good a work as you're doing now. You've ended up following your heart or your head into this fantastic work, and you've managed to become a very rare species on Earth, which is a true journalist. Really, and
Well,
there are so few. I mean, in the Western media on the internet, I really think I could say for me I've only come. There's probably not even 1,000. 1,000 names.
I will graciously accept that, and I will try not to blush like a maiden at the fact that you're saying all of that. But
Uh,
thank you. No, I truly do appreciate that feedback.
oh well, I'm glad also that you're getting paid and not just getting compliments. You do deserve it,
Both are appreciated.
and you put in the effort, and I can see that the universe would glad the universe that the energetic vacuum and whatever it is that we're in would naturally find a way to bring its energy back for all the energy that you've pumped out over the time. Um, One last question, and this is something that I always ask boyfriends when I go out on a date, and I always say it's probably why I'm single. Tell me something about yourself that you don't want me to know. No, don't. No,
um,
I always want to stop people because I'm like, that is such a rude question,
it is a
Lisa.
rude question,
Putting
but
them on the spot.
I'll give it a go. I'll give it a go.
No, don't. You'll ruin it.
No, 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 no. I think we can do something here. So something I don't want you to know. Uh, I don't know if I'm currently wearing them. I'll have to think about that. But I have special Christmas underwear that I wear throughout the year because I like them so much. They've got little snowmen on them, so they're
See,
very cute.
that is why I love and trust you, because you're honest. You're so painfully honest. That is, that may well come back to haunt me, that image, but
that's why you don't want to know that. That's the
next
primary
time,
reason you don't want to know
next, thank God you're already married, because I would have rejected you. No, I would not have. I'd put up with anything to be your friend, because I think you're a really great person. So, James, thank you so much for giving me an hour of your time just to chew the fat. And thank you for giving me the incredible intelligence in your brain off the cuff like you have. And I just hope that you have a long and prosperous and wonderful life and family time, and just that everything goes great for you. And I hope, and we stay in touch, I hope, and talk more over the future.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for the conversation. It's definitely a different conversation than I'm used to, but I appreciate that. It's very, very nice to have this conversation. So thank you for having me.
My pleasure. All right, James, have a lovely evening, and we'll speak again sometime.
All right. You too. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye bye.